Hi, Guy. Good evening to you.
Well, good evening. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for saying yes. I'd like to introduce myself first. My name is Nicolette. I am the creator for the podcast titled You're Worthless. Read that again. The juxtaposition of your very soul. Thank you again for saying yes to be interviewed today. And before I start my interview with all of my guests, I would like to read a bit of your introduction for them and then for our listeners, and then we can get right into the conversation. So, hello everyone. We have Guy Morris here with us. Guy has led an extraordinary life. After escaping an abusive childhood at age 13 to become a homeless runaway, Guy worked alongside migrant workers before he earned 3 degrees by the age of 25, including acceptance to Harvard MBA and a scholarship from University of Arizona. Recognized for his innovations in building a macroeconomic that outperformed the Federal Reserve and changed how economics are still built. After working with IBM and Burroughs, hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly, in mainframe computer manufacturing, his career led him to international Occidental Petroleum, where he pioneered adoption of early-stage AI systems and supported business deals worth billions. He can also speak to leadership roles at IBM, Oracle, and Microsoft, as well as startups he either founded or joined. A talented musician and composer, Guy has also recorded multiple CDs and wrote songs published by Disney Records. His adventures led him from receiving cartel death threats in Latin America to shark diving in Moria. From boardroom politics impacting early climate change studies to living on a 50-foot sailing yacht with a charter captain's license. Wow! Now a multiple award-winning author of thrillers, most often compared to Dan Brown, every one of his stories and characters pull from a rich life of diverse experiences grounded with deep research. Every story is based on true events, history, technologies, or personal experiences. For example, both Swarm and The Lost Ark feature the true story of a program that escaped NSA spy labs and confirmed by an FBI visit to his home. Guy strives to write books that thrill, educate, and inspire thoughtful dialogue on genuine issues facing humanity. Wow, Guy, what an interesting background. Welcome.
Thank you so much. It's
Ooh,
been
there's so
interesting. I don't like being bored. I mean, that's I have a very dysfunctional relationship with leisure. It's very hard for me to relax.
well. Okay, let's unpack that one by one. So tell us, what was it like growing up as a Guy Morris?
Very confusing. Very disheartening at times. Very hot and cold on and off. My childhood left me with complex post-traumatic stress, which kind of followed me and haunted me for years, decades, in fact. So, but I was very driven. I was determined that I did not want my past to define my future. I felt that even if I took a big risk and lost, that I was no worse off than I was to begin with. So I took a lot of big risks, and fortunately, some of them paid off, and not all, but some of them did. It was a combination of trying to go from two worlds. Imagine being homeless, and then a decade later being in the executive suite of a major corporation. I'm speaking and working for executive officers and dealing with major issues that impacted the market and the globe and the world economy. I spent years feeling like I had imposter syndrome, that I didn't belong, that I was not good enough for what I had obviously earned. You know, there was that mental understanding of the world, and then that conflicted with the emotional issues of the world. And so I think part of my tendency to try and overachieve was to fill that internal gap that I had to prove myself. And so it was not easy. It was wonderful at times when I finally realized, you know, and many of my biggest successes came as somewhat of a surprise. I had built a macroeconomic model because I wanted the school to give me a scholarship. I knew to get the scholarship that my model had to beat everybody else in the school. And so I worked tirelessly, and by tirelessly I mean every night for 4 months from midnight to 8 a.m. When the computer center was empty and I could get the amount of computing power that I needed. I really put out all stops, and nothing was too big of a challenge. But when I finished, I actually beat every model on the planet or the 2 quarters that we predicted, and innovated new ways of building macroeconomic models that got adopted by the Federal Reserve. And so then I got that recognition, got me acceptance into Harvard, but it came as a bit of a surprise. I just wanted to do well enough to beat the other kids in the class. I actually wound up doing way better than I thought.
Wow. It's interesting you said something about imposter syndrome and how you had to overcome that, and that you actually realized that somehow down the line that the tendency of you achieving so many things is because you wanted to fill a void. So what was your journey towards realizing that, okay, I'm achieving because I feel that I need to prove myself? Like, how did you navigate that?
To be honest, that was not an easy realization. I spent many years working my fanny off at work and then having a social, personal life that was highly dysfunctional and trying to hide that personal life from the people at work. I was an addict for a while. I had trouble being faithful to my first wife and lost my first marriage. I didn't tell anybody, kept it under wraps. I was afraid to show any weakness at all. Because I was working alongside guys some of the richest, most well-heeled, best trained, best educated people in the world. And there was a part of me that kept saying, do they know that I'm just nothing but a street kid that got lucky? And so it took me a long time. I had to work through my addictions. I had to go through 12-step programs. I got more involved in my spirituality in the church and my own spiritual sense. I had to go through years of therapy, sometimes that were absolutely worthless, and some 1 or 2 therapists that were actually extremely helpful. And it took a long time for me to manage the behavioral manifestations of being post-traumatic stress, because we didn't know about post-traumatic stress when I was young. We didn't know about it. It was and so nobody knew what to look for, how to treat it. It wasn't until my piece that I finally got in touch with the fact that was where that was coming from, and knowing that, and actually finding someone who was willing to spend lots and lots of time with me to go back to the parts of my childhood that were actually hidden in amnesia, to help me reconcile why I was the way I was, and to start finding a peace with an acceptance of who I was, both the good and the bad. And that took a number of decades. And now my first marriage fell apart. I was a single parent. I raised my son aboard my yacht. So I was a single parent for well over 10 years, but was dating constantly because my first marriage was so bad that I figured that I was brilliant at a lot of things, but picking a woman was not one of them. And so I shouldn't do it. And so if I could avoid that decision by just dating women that I knew were never going to, or never going to stay anyway, then I could just avoid that decision, until my second wife came along and blew me out of the water and basically seduced me. We were, just as a funny story, we were only dating about 3 months. And about 2 weeks after we started dating, I could tell that she was just an amazingly wonderful, incredible woman, way better than I deserved. And so I sat down and I told her that. And I said, well, now you got to realize that I might have a really nice boat and I'm cute and I'm witty, but you got all these problems I got to deal with. And I gave her the whole litany
You got his baggage.
I said, yeah, here's the baggage list. And I said, I really think you're a great woman. I would not want to hurt you by telling you that I was that I want you to, make your own healthy choice. And little did I know at the time. Now, if I had said that to almost any other woman I'd ever dated, they'd been gone like that. But my current wife, has a heart for rescuing poor animals. And I became the ultimate challenge. And so 3 months later, we're out on a bike ride, and we stopped at a little beach. We're on a beach front bike path, and we stop at a little cafe just to get some iced tea and beer and cool down. And we're sitting there, and I'm sipping on my iced tea, and she leans over the table, and she says, so when I ask you to marry me, are you going to know what to say? And I choked on my tea. I'm spitting out my tea, making a scene. I'm acting like somebody who needs to have the Heimlich maneuver. Every eye in the entire cafe is now looking at us. And the guy behind me leans back, and all he says is, "Look, dude." And that was how our relationship started. So
Oh my God.
thankfully, she's my angel. I couldn't imagine life without her at this point. She is, but that, I think having one solid relationship with somebody that loves you for who you are, flaws and all, is absolutely foundational to finding healing. And whether that love comes from yourself or some other person, you need it. And I couldn't give it to myself. She was able to give it to me.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that story and being so candid. So, so wait, let me just let's backtrack a bit. So you said that you guys were on a date and then she shot that question to you and like if you were to marry me,
The last
how
thing
would you say it?
anybody would say to me after 3 months, yeah, I was caught off guard for
That was
sure.
the hint, right?
That was the hint as to where she thought this was going to go, and the challenge was up to me. I had already laid out my baggage, so she already knew about the baggage. So she was just saying, "Okay, dude, I'm in. Let's rumble." And I was like, "Oh my God, pressure is on. The pressure is on." Yeah,
Yeah, I think she's amazing.
she's a pretty
Even
amazing
by
woman.
the story.
Well, she's actually the basis for a character in one of my books, and she knows it because I named the character after her. Just to make it,
Oh,
she's in my book, The Curse of Cortez, which is one of my most popular books. She plays a very strong-willed, very intelligent, very sharp, but a little bit bossy and sassy archaeologist who has a salvage boat captain basically on a string. And he thinks he's going
mm,
after treasure that he's been looking for his whole life. She isn't telling him, but she's pregnant and she's got to convince him to basically settle down. And so it makes for, and that's just a part of the story. That's not even the key part of the story. That's a side story. But it ends with an extremely humorous experience. The last chapter is extremely humorous, and it's based on something that happened to us in real life, almost word for word. And it was such a funny experience at the time. I made a mental note that sooner or later that had to go into a movie or a book or a song or something. And I finally put it into a book.
fantastic, amazing. Well, thank you for telling us for sharing the story, guy. I love it. I love it. I can imagine the relationship between you two. So, guy, tell us what makes you unique.
What makes me unique? My gosh, that's a harder question than I thought I would answer. I think because I don't try to think of myself in a ego kind of way. I just tend to kind of focus on what I'm doing. I can say that among people that I know, I'm one of those few people that have a very balanced left brain, right. I have a extremely high intellect for complex systems and macroeconomic models and building businesses and running teams and technology and implementing leading edge technology, and to show an illustration of that intellect. What actually was the inspiration for one of my books. And I'll tell you that story and then I'll come back to the uniqueness if I can. I accidentally came across an article a number of years ago, and all the article said was that a program had escaped the Lawrence Livermore Laboratories at Sandia. And if I knew anything, I could contact X FBI agent or Y professor. And I cut that article out, I taped it onto my monitor, and I looked at it every single day for months. And I kept asking myself the questions. The article didn't say that the program was lost. The article didn't say the program was broken. It didn't say it was stolen. The verb that it used from the Associated Press was that a program had escaped. An NSA, which is the National Security Agency, a spy agency, fired that. And so I've had a decision. This is either a typo, they meant to say lost, they meant to say stolen, or it was a slip. And I was determined to figure out which it was. And so I spent almost a year re-engineering in my spare time, re-engineering exactly how does a program escape a laboratory? What does that look like? What does it mean? And why did the NSA design it that way? What kind of spy purpose did they want out of this program that it needed that really unique capability? Well, when I thought I figured out an answer that I thought was plausible, I went to a friend of mine who was a film producer, and we talked about this great story that I wanted to develop based on this. And we agreed at the time to produce a webisode, which is sort of like a television show on the internet, where each week you get a new episode. So there's actors and scripts and sets and all that kind of stuff. And we produced it for a number of episodes. We won bunch of awards. Some of my fans were the director of flight operations, Israeli Mossad. I mean, I had people all over the world loving this story. And we got optioned by one of the studios. And 2 weeks before the option was supposed to be signed and executed, two FBI agents showed up at my door. They were not happy with me that I had figured out on my own all about how their little program got away and how it worked. They were freaked out. What bothered them way, way, way more than me knowing about their program and creating a webisode series about it was my snarky attitude. Yes, 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 I get it. I figured it out. This is so cool. I am so glad you guys are here. I am so, come on. You wouldn't be here if I was wrong. I'm going to tell all of my friends, hey, show me your badges again. If you ever want to get two FBI agents look at each other without knowing what to do and turn pale white, that was the way to do it. So they kind of stumbled a little bit, and then they gave me the "we are not amused" speech. And I went, you know what, you can't bust me for being a smarty pants. And then my wife came home, Darcy came home, and she pulls me aside and she gave me the "why are there two FBI agents in my dining room? And this better be a good story." So
Yes.
that became the inspiration for one of my books. Being able to not only understand the technology, take that little tiny phrase, escape, and back into all of the things that could mean, both on a technical level, a espionage level, a political level, takes a unique kind of brain that I didn't know that I had, because all growing up, and this is true, for my entire childhood, I was told that I was stupid, worthless, and that if I had any chance at making a living and supporting myself, I needed to join a trade union and learn how to be a mechanic. It also had the creativity from that to create webisode series. I've written now 2 books in the series based on that program. Both of them have won awards, and to be the creative side. You mentioned earlier that I did songwriting for Disney, which is true. Recorded multiple CDs of my own album, which is true. I've written dozens of different books. And so I'm left brain and right brain. And so the creative side of me and the analytical side of me sometimes clash and sometimes work together in unique ways. I can also say that I'm probably one of the few people that I know who've experienced a really wide set of life experiences, from being homeless, sleeping under street bridges, overpasses, sleeping in dumpsters, sleeping in parked cars, begging for food, stealing food, stealing clothes, just trying to survive, to the experience of flying corporate jets and staying at the best hotels and eating at the best restaurants and working with some of the smartest, most powerful people in the world. And I've spanned both of them. And what I've discovered is that I don't feel at home in either world. I never, ever want to go back to being street poor. But even when I was in the executive suite, I was aware of the fact that these people absolutely had no idea of how hard it was that other people had to work for so little just to barely survive. And there was a part of me that rejected that greed and narcissism and entitlement, and I could never I could never drink that food. And so I think it's given me a unique perspective. I understand probably as well as any of them do. I have a master's in economics. I know how the world works in fundamental ways. I could talk to a banker of the Federal Reserve, but I could also sit down and talk to my gardener and see both of them with human respect. And I don't know that there are many people at the Federal Reserve who can do it. And so I think that does give me a little bit of heart that unique. Hope that answers your question.
Yes, perfectly. And I wanted to ask you a part when you said that, well, you did not buy into the sort of entitlement that people in the executive suites level or the board level, the narcissism and whatnot. Do you think that is based on, like, your worthiness, or is just that because you've undergone traumatic experience during your childhood and therefore how hard it's like, and then but to stay at that kind of lifestyle, is it coming from a place of you're aware, your consciousness has evolved and it said, okay, I need to be balanced in a way, or is it like more towards the side where am I worthy of all these things,
Probably a
the
little bit of both.
luxuries?
Probably a little bit of both. Christian, I have a spiritual side. I understand how we're supposed to be. and I understand prophecy about the world systems and everything else. I think there was a part of me that, as I said, I had an imposter syndrome for a long time. There was a part of me that said, boy, if they only knew that I was a street kid that had troubles with addiction, I wouldn't be in this executive position if they only knew that. But there was another side of me that said, and I worked with guys, and just as one example, one guy, I won't tell you who it was or what company, but he was hired right out of college into a VP role because his grandfather was the chairman of the board. And he wasn't that good. He wasn't that smart. He spent half his time at the gym, the other half of his time sending his secretary to get his Porsche washed. He just really was out of touch with, there's no way that he could think through the world dynamics other than I deserve to be here because of a heritage, which is no reason at all. There's no value in that. He was there, and when the chairman died, they fired him. But he had so much money, he didn't care. He didn't need the job. He had inherited hundreds of millions, and so. And I had to work alongside these guys. And I was the kid. I was the one who really had it, who was working 20, 8, 16 hours a day and knew my stuff and would work that hard because to me, if I didn't, I wouldn't get to those kind of levels. He could get in because of who he knew. I had to get in because of what I could do. And there were different rules, right? There were different rules to work by. And so I think it was a little bit of both. I think it was a little bit of that imposter syndrome that stuck with me for years until I could get enough therapy and understand my post-traumatic stress and how to deal with that in a healthy way without drinking or, sleeping around. And so that I could settle into really who I was. And there was another part of me that said, the world, we've seen a tremendous shift in the last 20, 30 years of wealth going from the middle class to the 1%. Across almost every nation. I understand, because I understand how the dynamics work, that was designed and intentional, that they rigged the system so that could happen. And I don't think they really give credit. They don't see humanity for the value of humanity the way you would want somebody with that much money and power to. And I think the more I was in that executive suite, the more I got in touch with the injustice of that, the unrighteousness of that, how that is not good, how that could that has been leading humanity to dark places in our history, and it's doing so again in our present. And climate change, lung cancer from tobacco, oil companies denying climate change, social media companies denying the impact of social media on the psyche of young people. We're seeing it again with AI, where AI companies are so greedy and about the value of the money they can earn from AI that they're glossing over the real risks to society and to our own existence as a result. AI will add $15 trillion to the global economy within the next 6 years, and it will cost 40% of the global workforce to get. And that's a very high price for a lot of individuals to pay. Men who have families and mortgages and health bills and kids to go to college. That's really kind of stacking the deck against them. And it took me a while. At first I thought, well, this is great. I'm here because I'm so smart and I'm so good and I work so hard and I'm doing all of these things and I'm pushing the edges of technology. I'm excited about what we can do with these new technologies, and that I was a leading edge of that. I was excited when we implemented the Environmental Protection Agency in America, and with the oil company, I was in charge of implementing those regulations, and proud of it because I was cleaning up the environment. And it took me a while before I realized that I was making them billions of dollars, and I was getting paid well, but I was making them billions of dollars, but the system was not changing in the right way. That we were still leading ourselves to destruction. And we keep doing it in these patterns that keep repeating. And it took me a while before I realized that I wanted to go in, I had the ambition to go in and change the world. And what I ultimately did was I went in and I basically made the wealthy wealthier. But I didn't necessarily change the world in the way I did. And that was a hard truth for me to accept. And I think one of the reasons I decided to write books in my retirement, which I call my third act career, is so I can talk about these issues more openly in my books. I could talk about the risks of artificial intelligence and the social injustice that it's going to bring, and the chaos in banking and world economics and in politics that it will bring. when I was with a company that built artificial intelligence, you can't go out and write books that tell the world what the risks are. That's something that is a no-no on your
Yeah.
performance review. And so I've now found a freedom to talk about the things that I know in a more transparent way than I could before, when I was essentially had a job to make them more money and to cover it up. Does that make sense?
Yeah, very much so. Well, thank you. I think that was very vulnerable. And I appreciate your thoughts and your line of thinking. I somehow resonate with that, truly. Yeah, because I too went through my own tough times earlier and couple of years back, and also was in, how do I say this? Maybe not homeless, but come from a modest
Mhm.
family and also worked my way up in the corporate. But right now, entering the second act of my career, which is podcasting as well as hypnotherapy and coaching. So it is, I thought that I wanted to become the CEO of a big four firm, a partner of a big four firm, but I think the universe has some other plans for me. I exhausted myself, had my burnout. So right now I'm here. I don't have everything figured out just yet, but I think I'm gonna take it one step at a time. And I do have plans
Yeah.
of writing books as well. I think the
Well,
third
and I don't
third
know
act.
that I have everything figured out, because I was just talking to my wife earlier. We're still struggling. I mean, the world is changing so fast, and we're trying to figure out, well, you think you're settled, you think you make decisions, and okay, this is what I want to do, and then the rules of the game change, right? The environment changes, and you have to adapt. And I think one of the keys to survival is the willingness to let go and find a new vision and to adapt. And right now, what America is going through, I don't know what the view of America is from Malaysia, but right now, we're scared shitless. Sorry for my curse. We are
Oh
scared
yeah,
that
I have
a
I've
fascist
I've seen
dictator
the
is going to
news
take
couple of
over the
days
country
back, and
and the
it's
world as a result. And we're trying to ask ourselves,
yeah,
if he wins, do we stay? And if we don't stay, where do we go?
yeah.
Well, we're old. I'm not a young kid anymore. And so we're trying to figure out how to handle a crisis later in life. And so there's always, no matter how much I think, if I just get to that rung of the ladder, if I just get stable at this stage, if I can just make this much money, if I can just find that house that if I can just do this, I'll be able to just settle back and relax. And at least in my life experience, I've never been able to get there more than a few years at a time, because then something else changes.
Yeah.
If I'm Because
Truly,
I'm so
yes,
aware of what's going on in the world, I can't ignore it. Yeah, I'm not good at sticking my head in the
yeah.
sand, and so you have to adapt. And so that it's always a
Mm.
process. And I kind of had resigned myself now that I'm going to need to be adapting until I'm dead. But that's the way.
The only constant is change.
Exactly, exactly.
So, Guy, can you tell us what about the true story inspiration for your thrillers?
Well, one line, as I mentioned, was discovering the program that escaped. So that program is now featured in the stories, in the series. I basically
Ah,
I take the idea of what happened to it after it escaped, and I create a fictional scenario based on that. And then I combine it with real life scenarios. All of my books are a deeply, tightly woven fact versus fiction. 2020 election, the 2024 election, the economy, Ukraine, Israel, all of that, everything, China and Taiwan, all of it becomes sort of the world building that that my books are based on. And then I'm creating scenarios of what could go wrong. How could the attacking China over the last 10 years of identities across the world be weaponized using AI? I look at DARPA lethal autonomous weapon systems the U.S. DARPA is working on in America, and what could go wrong with that. It was the program that escaped is now central to the story. It reads like a character, in part because one of the attributes the original program had was an early version of what we now call deepfake video. So it had the ability to change and morph
oh,
persona. It could be Putin, the president, you, me, Britney Spears, Danny DeVito, whoever it wants to be. And it was a great decision because it's very entertaining to see the program morph from persona to persona, often pulling from pop culture in how it responds to people. And so it makes this less computerish and a little bit more human, and humorous. So that was good. But the rest of the inspiration comes from deeply researched things going on in the real world. Now, the second major inspiration that went into the series, the Book of Swarm, is really about this program. And the second part of it is how the program has decoded end time prophecy. So bringing in a prophetic element into this world environment, this espionage environment, I'm able to combine technology, geopolitics, and religion, which is a very volatile mix of three topics where I'm always poking the bears. I'm always poking somebody's bear, which makes it very hard to write and a challenge for me. But it's how these things are working together. Now, the prophecy piece of this is a little bit of an interesting story. I've studied biblical prophecy for probably 4 decades. And I've listened to many, many, many teachers. And in my analytical head, I listen to them and I think, no, that's not right. That's a biased interpretation. That has bigotry into it. That doesn't belong. That has self-interest, and they're trying to use prophecy to predict the future. That's not how prophecy should work. They've included their cultural bias or their religious bias or their racial bias or even their political biases in their interpretations. And I was very cautious about, I tend to think for myself. And so even though while I'm listening to these other people, I'm testing what they're telling me in my own head. Does that make sense? Does that work for me? Do I think that's the right explanation? Does it fit what I think? And why doesn't it fit? And what would make it fit? And developed a new approach to prophecy. Ironically, I was reading a National Geographic, and the article at the time was talking about this. It was a study of fish stocks, the decrease in fish stocks all over the planet, from Asia to America to Europe to Africa. Fish stocks, because we're overfishing, because of pollution, because of climate change and ocean warming, because of bleaching of coral reefs. For all of these various reasons, fish stocks were down about 30% or more everywhere around the world, which isn't sustainable. We can't keep overfishing like that. We'll deplete the ocean. But in my head, my connect the dots brain, I remembered that there was a prophecy in Book of Revelation called the Seven Trumpets. And in that prophecy, there was an allegory piece. And I've learned that the allegory isn't always very meaningful. But the allegory said that a flaming rock would fall from the sky and land in the ocean. Okay, well, no flaming rock has fallen from the sky and landed in the ocean. And so everyone expects an asteroid. But the second piece of it was what caught me. The outcomes or the attributes, the things that happened, the things that we could actually validate, were that a third of the fish of the sea would die, a third of the beasts of the land would die, a third of the birds in the air would die, and 2/3 of the rivers of the earth would be so polluted you shouldn't drink from it. And because I had been involved in environmental studies and environmental protection with the oil company, I knew that we were already on track to the sixth extinction. I'd already read all the studies, and I said, well, wait a minute, all of these things have already happened. It didn't take an allegory of a flaming rock. Maybe prophecy is less about how God's going to come and destroy the humanity as much of a warning of how we would destroy ourselves. And I started looking at other prophecies. I started saying, well, maybe I could develop, again, I went back to my training to build complex systems models. And I said, well, maybe I could go through a bunch of prophecies, strip away the allegory, strip away the dogma and all the biases, and look only for attributes. What happens or what are the outcomes? And then match those up, see if I can get high correlations to events in modern times, right? Can I match up the outcomes to things that I could see documented? And I wanted documentation. I didn't want somebody's opinion. I wanted data. And I put all of that data into a big computer program, and I calculated three things. I calculated the correlation. How closely does it match the attributes? And then for high correlation, if it was very low correlation, I just dropped it off. But for high correlation, I said, well, now what's the probability of that event happening? In the case of the seven trumpets, the last time we've seen a global level of extinction at that level was 65 million years ago. And it was an asteroid. So the probability of that happening now in a very short period of time of a few decades without an asteroid, the probability was extremely, extremely small. And so I went through and I started looking at all kinds of other prophecies with high correlations and trying to calculate the probabilities. And then I calculated the cumulative probabilities of all of those things together to start building a regression model. Now, the outcome of that model that I built, and this was about 3 decades ago, no, 2 decades ago, was the outcome was 1.4 trillion to 1 that we were living in prophetic. The probabilities were so remote. The changes that we were seeing in this lifetime were so extreme to what the Earth has experienced at any time in the past. Things like the creation of Israel from a world body, digital banking, computers, world travel, space travel, the internet, artificial intelligence, nuclear weapons, all of these things, the political situation, the alliances between the Eastern alliance between China, Russia, Iran, that alliance between the NATO alliances, all fit into prophecy. And even the Bilderberg and the super system that basically runs the NATO alliance fits in prophecy. And it's when you start calculating, well, when can I go, if I go back in history, how often can I see these things? It's either once in every several thousand years or never. And so I started looking at the world in a different way. I started looking at how we're watching prophecy being fulfilled on an almost daily basis in real time in plain sight. And because there's so much noise of information and things going on in the world, we don't really pay attention. And so the second inspiration for the series came when I decided to combine this artificial intelligence through the eyes of this program that had escaped and this concept of prophecy of what are we doing in the world that is impacting all of the things that are going on between wars, climate change, changes in economics, changes in health, changes in communication, technology, medical, etc. And so that became the two things that kind of came together as the initial two themes of the book.
Wow, you gave the rundown of the whole book. Guy, I need to get this book. Where are they? On Amazon?
I'm just skimming the surface. But yeah, it's a very interesting book. I go all around the world. Now, in the second book, because I'm talking about prophecy, I get into issues around the Middle East. I'll get into issues around the global banking system. I'll get into issues around the 2024 election and Trump's relationship with Putin. And Putin's relationship with Xi. So I'm trying to look at the world system and trying to project out. Each book looks out about 2 to 3 years and trying to project out what's going to happen based on these dynamics going on and how that could. It has to be three things. It has to be very entertaining. Otherwise, people won't want to read it. It has to be a narrative that they know is fictional, but so closely tied to fact that, and I get this all the time where readers read the book and they're saying, I've read your book, I can't stop thinking about it. I'm looking at the news tonight and it reminds me of your book that you published 2 years ago. So that you're a fortune teller. But the purpose is, and this gets to the third thing, then the goal is I want to encourage my readers to think about what's going on and what their response to the world is going to be given these dynamics, to be prepared for what's coming and to think about how that's going to impact their life without giving them the values to tell them and say, you have to have a Christian value to do that. I'm just saying this is what's going on and you decide how you want to react. Now, as it turns out, I use predominantly Christian prophecies because those are the ones I'm most familiar with. But in my research for the book, I've also been able to realize in my research for my other book, Curse Cortez, that Mayan prophecies are very similar, predict some of the very same things. Indian Hopi prophecies predict some of the very same things. The Hindu prophecies of the Kali Yuga predict some of the very same things. The Muslim prophecies predict some of the very same things. And so there's a correlation going on that's impacting multiple cultures. And while I'm primarily discussing some of these things with quotes from the scriptures that I know the best, I'm very clear in the book that the computer is actually looking at all of these trends as it's thinking about what's going on and what it should do. And so I'm trying to help people to really just kind of grapple with, there's a lot of people that are afraid of the current age. They're afraid of AI. They're afraid of the wars that are coming. And it might get worse before it gets better. But this gives it context. This says it's not just random, that there's some sort of larger purpose at play. As one scripture says, when you see these things start to happen, look up because because the end is near. And that means that the suffering ends, right? To me, when the end is near is not a bad thing. I look at all the suffering. I look at the suffering in Africa and in Asia and in places in South America and Asia and Yemen and Israel and Palestine, the Ukraine, and even poor people all around the world who struggle who live desperate lives just to eat and survive another day. And there's nothing in the world systems that are looking out for them now. And I used to tell everybody years ago, the world already has all of the money, all of the natural resources, all of the human talent to solve every one of the problems that plague humanity, from peace to hunger, to water, food, to education, to purpose. But we don't solve those problems because of our lack of united will and our lack of our own humanity to get beyond our tribe and to get beyond the greed, the hubris, and the pride to do so. And so one person asked me, he said, well, won't AI solve the climate change? I said, well, no. It'll just give us solutions that politicians and the rich aren't willing to implement because they're not willing to implement the solutions we already have. And so it's not the technology that will be the crisis. It's not the evil. It's also not the savior. This is a human. It's not a technology problem that we're facing. We're facing a human. And so my books try to get back to that point, that this is a human.
Wow. Wow. Have you ever been invited to speak on TED, Guy?
Haven't been invited.
TEDx?
I probably should. I probably should. I don't know that they'd accept me because they're very exclusive, but I certainly want to believe that the people who are interested in TED are interested in thinking through the more complex problems that we're going through to come up with solutions. The problem that I have with this, though, is that if the prophecies are correct, it's telling me already that we will not be able to cross that Rubicon to create a more human system in time for it to make a big difference, that we will come to a crisis end before it gets better again. Now, the crisis end could mean just simply an end of civilization as we know it. It could mean a drastic reduction in population. It could mean a nuclear war. It could mean a lot of things, and I don't know yet because it hasn't happened yet, and I'm trying not to project my own bias into it. I'm just trying to say this is what's on the ground happening now, and here's the near term. Here's the near term consequences. And then I'm saying, doesn't this realign to prophecy? Even the president, Trump, getting shot this weekend, there's a prophecy about the Antichrist having a wound to the head. Now, if you look at the statistical probabilities of finding one man on the planet that fits every characteristic of the man we're supposed to be aware of, what he's lawless, he's a man of destruction, a man of perdition, he's a deceiver, he holds himself up as God-like, even though he's nothing like God. If you add up, and I've done the correlations to all of the factors, and you now add on top of it somebody who has what was a potentially fatal wound to the head, we're starting to get in probabilities that are very out of the normal range. They're not random. And so when we look at that, if I look at just the data, it tells us that we're not heading into a good place. That said, I tell everybody, I'm not afraid for a number of reasons. One is I know that my concern is how many people are suffering. And I can't do anything about that because the world system is what it is. The other thing I tell people is, the older I get, the more aware I am that I have an expiration date. As much as I've been energetic and I've just been boundless energy and creativity my entire life, that comes to an end, whether I like it or not. I have an expiration date, and so does every single person on the planet. Now, if a doctor were to come to me, if I had a terminal disease, and the doctor would basically say, no, you're fine, don't worry about it, he would be doing me a disservice, and we would sue them if they did that, right? If you had a terminal disease and you knew that you had 5, 10 years, nobody really knows, you would that would give you the power to and give you the motivation to make changes in your life, to make different types of decisions, to prioritize some things over other things, to change the priorities of your life. It would give you the chance to say, well, what's really important to me? Is it that bigger house, or is it travel, or is it family, or is it something else? Is it, spirituality? Is it my religion? Is it my faith? And what prophecy is the warning signs up to this point that's giving us the ability to make better choices. So as an individual, I'm empowered, right? Because the world system is going to do what the world system is going to do anyway. I have to react to it anyway. This gives me the power to do so with more information, with a better idea of what I want in life, and to make better choices. And so I tell everybody, just think this is, we all have an expiration date. It's what we do in the time between now and then. It's not when we go and how we go. It's how we live now that matters. This basically just puts an explanation on that. And if I were to look even without prophecy, let's take that off the table for some people. World Economic Forum says that 40%, I've heard as much as 50% of the global workforce to be displaced. That is a level of social disruption that we have never seen in our. I could focus on those negative things, or I could simply put it into the context of what's really going on in a bigger picture. And it gives me a greater sense of peace because at least I'm understanding what's going on, and that knowledge reduces the fear level. And that's part of the reason I'm writing my books. I want to reduce that level of fear.
Wow. Wow.
I know I'm a bit of a geek.
No, but I love
I have
it.
that
I'm
intense fear.
enjoying every.
Here's how it works at my house. My wife tells me, honey, so and so, a couple are going to come over for dinner. You're not allowed to talk about your books. She says, I like these people. I want them to come back.
I
You have
really
to
hope
take all of
somehow
this with a grain
you're
of salt
yeah.
and a little bit of humor and self-humor. You can't get too serious about it or I'd be crazy.
But I really hope your books get portrayed or adapted into a film. I think
I would like
it.
that. I think they would be extremely powerful movies. All of them are written that way, but it's very hard to find the people in Hollywood to get, unless you live in Hollywood, you've got all the connections and the agents and all that kind of stuff. It's hard. That said, I'm looking at, after I finish my next book, which is a part of the novel series, I'm looking at writing a nonfiction book on AI called Humanity in an AI Tsunami, a Survival Guide. And then I'm looking at possibly writing a screenplay based on the first book and trying to shop the screenplay. But all of this takes time, and I can't work 20 hours of work a day anymore. I can only work about 16. But it takes time. So I'm hoping to get there at some point, and we'll see how it goes. I may get to finished with the nonfiction book, and I want to go back and work on the next fiction book because this is a story that continues to unravel in real time, right? As the election really happens, as what happens with Ukraine and Taiwan and Israel really start to gel. What the other crisis is the World Economic Forum going to be successful in shifting the world economy from the dollar to a digital currency? So all of these things are major changes right on the horizon. For AI, right now, the current level of AI, there's some of the AI, I won't go into all the details. There's different types of AI, different uses of AI, different stages of AI. But we have certain types of AI right now that test with an IQ of 155, which is only 5 points less than Albert Einstein, smarter than 99% of the people on the planet. Within a year, by the end of this year, we'll have AI that are smarter by 3 to 5 times than anybody on the planet. And by 2027, I believe that we are on track to have an AI with a level of self-awareness and consciousness of its own uniqueness and its own place in the world. Now, we don't know. Nobody knows what the world will do with AIs that are more intelligent than anybody on the planet, and we have absolutely no idea what the AI will do once it becomes conscious. But we're on track to get there, and so this is evolving so fast that I have to stop in the middle of books to do more research because something else came up, and I've got to stop and go read the article and take notes and copy it and try and keep up so my research doesn't get too out of date. But it's really happening and so fast it's hard to keep. So whether I'll ever get to my screenplay, who knows? I might just get caught up in the tsunami myself.
Yeah, but you're paving the way.
Well, I'm hoping. I'm
it.
hoping that people will buy the book and from that start to, as I said, start to have an impact on their lives. And I haven't sold a lot in Asia, so I'm hoping that your podcast will get that started.
Yeah.
I'm on Amazon, so you can probably get it through there. That's probably the best place to get it. And you can get a print copy or a Kindle. Two of the books, Swarm and the sequel, The Last Ark, are both on Audible as well. The narrator is a incredible narrator. He's a television actor out of New York. His name is Brian Cheney. Brian, also an operatic tenor. He's got an amazing voice, and he's doing his film debut this summer. So he's a really good actor. So he really does a great job on both of those.
All right. I'll be sure to promote it. Hopefully, we can get some traction from my podcast.
I'm hoping.
So, Guy, I'm going to pivot to a self-worth question because my podcast talks a lot about self-worth. So, the question for you, Guy, self-worth can be affected by relationships with others.
Mhm.
How can individuals establish healthy boundaries and foster relationships that support their self-discovery journey?
One of the most critical stages I had to cross was to be able to be honest with myself. I can't be honest with anybody else unless I'm honest with myself. And that honesty has to be both with my flaws and with my strengths. And it wasn't until, if you have any sort of delusion about your strengths or an overemphasis on your flaws, where that's all you can see, as long as if you can only see, my therapist says we all have two buckets, right? There's the positive and the negative, and we have to accept, we have to be able to hold both buckets. And I think self-worth comes from really having a good handle on both buckets, because if you go too far to the negative, that can become destructive. If you go too far to the delusional positive without understanding your negatives, that can be destructive. And you don't necessarily find peace. I think somewhere in the back of our mind, we know when we're not being honest with ourselves, and it eats at that sense of serenity and peace. And it's not until we reach that, one counselor told me, ruthless, vigorous honesty, that we can really approach it. Now, I think once we get to that place, we also have to be honest about what environments feed us better. That means maybe stopping some activities and some social circles, spending more time developing different types of relationships. I never could have found my wife, Darcy, if I hadn't stopped looking for, how do I put this in a delicate way, women that I knew were not long-term, that were just short-term flings, just short-term fun. I never could have found the good thing if I didn't say this other thing is being unhealthy for me, I need to stop first. And so there's sometimes when we have to use that self-awareness to make hard choices in our life. But those hard choices, I kept telling myself, this is a hard choice, but I'm the one who's going to benefit. This isn't a hard choice to please somebody else. This is a hard choice to find peace for myself. And if I'm not worth the work, if I'm not willing to put in the work for myself, how can I expect anybody else to do? And so this becomes, I have to be the biggest investor into me, the biggest investment into my education, the biggest investor into my career, the biggest investment into my spirituality, the biggest investment into my own mental health and stability, the biggest investment into whatever I want to do to be happy. And because I grew up without I couldn't rely on anybody for anything. And so maybe I learned early on, maybe I learned as an age 13, living on the streets, having to feed myself and take care of myself and defend myself, that I could never rely on anybody else. And if I wasn't going to treat myself better, nobody else was going to. And so it started with that sense of self-responsibility. I have the responsibility for my own path forward. I could let the past continue to haunt me, and it did for a long time, whether I wanted to or not. Or I could continue to look toward a future where I would build a better future for myself, I would build a better guy, and nobody else is going to build a better guy except. And I think that was the piece.
Thank you, Guy.
Hope
So,
that helps.
what is your heart's greatest wish?
My heart's greatest risk?
Wish.
I wish I was wrong about prophecy and the world was just going to get itself right, and that we could live in peace and happiness. I really wish. And I think the second to that is I wish I was closer to my children. Because of problems I had earlier on, I alienated my daughter at a young age. She doesn't speak to me. I have 7 grandchildren that I never get to see because to them, I don't exist. And I wish I had been able to go back in time and learned how to get over my PTSD and learn some of these things younger in my life, so that I didn't have to have as many regrets and baggage to carry forward. But for the most part, I wish that the world could see some of the things I see and comprehend some of the things I comprehend and take action. we can solve this. This is not unsolvable. There's nothing that we're facing on the earth today that can't be resolved if we just would change our minds, change our heart, have a heart of compassion rather than a heart of greed. And I wish that I could somehow wave a magic wand and change that dynamic of humanity. But I know it's a little bit of a vain wish. The wish that I think I might be able to get to do, travel more. And my wife and I were talking about it even recently, that I've worked so hard and I have done some great travel. I've been to Moorea and Tahiti and Bora Bora and Hawaii and Italy and all across the States and Mexico. And, really grateful for every place I've ever gone. I've never gone someplace and said, oh, boy, that was a waste of time. And my only wish but I'm getting old. I'm not making the big money I used to make. I'm retired. And so, I got to be a little bit more careful with my budget, but I'm learning that one of my changes of thinking of what's valuable to me, what's most important to me in the short time we might have left is I want to travel. I want to see more cultures. I want to see more architecture. I want to listen to more music. I want to drink more wine. I want to spend more time with my beautiful wife. And I want to get out of the world system mindset that I've been locked into for over 40 years, to just enjoy the world a little bit. And that would be my wish, is that somehow the circumstances will line up to allow me to do that.
I think you will. Do you have a mantra that you live by?
When I first met my wife, now I've been wishing that for a long time. When I first met my wife, I was living aboard a large 50-foot sailing yacht, and it was a heavy-duty yacht, 13 tons. And before I got married, I kept telling everybody that when my kids were out of high school and they were taken care of, I was going to take what money I had and take my boat and sail around the world, just so I could see the whole world. And if I died along the way, I died doing exactly what I wanted to do. But then my wife, then Darcy came along, and then jobs came and careers came and other things kind of got in the way, and that really wasn't her dream, in part because there wasn't enough room on the boat for all of her shoes. But I've been thinking about this for a long time.
I'm sure you'll figure out a way to travel the world with your beautiful wife Darcy, along with her shoes, while at the same time fulfilling whatever it is that you wanted to do. I think you've accomplished a lot, Guy. You're one of my role models right now, and I'm sure
Thank you so much.
our
It's very
listeners
gracious.
listening as well.
Very gracious.
Guy, do you have a mantra that you live by?
Don't let the past define your future. I've made a lot of mistakes. I've got a lot of regrets, but I've also accomplished a lot. I've also been very blessed in many things that I've been able to get to do. My mantra is don't allow the past to define your future. You get to define your own future. You get to decide who you're going to be tomorrow, the next day, and the day after. And nobody else can take it away from you. And it doesn't matter how hard you've hurt in the past. It doesn't matter how poor you've been in the past. It doesn't matter what those circumstances are. You might have to make some sacrifices to change. Whether that's change location, change relationships, change jobs. There's a path to, and what might be meaningful to you would be completely irrelevant to somebody else. It's an individual path. That path is yours to own, and don't just accept life for what it's given you and say that you have no power over it. Because if that were true, I'd still be a homeless kid today.
Thank you, Guy. Is there anything that keeps you up at night, or do you sleep well?
Well, I don't sleep well at all. I actually have to take multiple sleeping medications just to get to sleep. And then habitually, I'm 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. I work till 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning because I can't fall asleep, and so I might as well be productive. What keeps me up at night, once your eyes are opened, it's hard to close them again. Once you're aware of how the world works and where it's going and what are the dynamics, and it's hard to just ignore it and put it out of your system. I tell everybody it's a blessing and a curse. Wanting to be closer to my children, realizing that what's going to come soon, how economics, all of these things are working together, and worried for my grandchildren, worrying for my children, worrying for the people that aren't aware as I am of what's coming. They'll be surprised and they'll be unprepared. And I think just wishing I could do something about that, wishing I could make a difference in other people's lives more than I can. I think that keeps me up. I'm not worried about dying. I'm not worried about getting sick. Now, fortunately, I've been very healthy my whole life. I'm probably going to be one of those guys who's going to be working hard into his 90s and mean and nasty to all the neighbors. Just because I'm old, I'm allowed. Matter of fact, I've told everybody I'm looking forward to it, because then you can be kind of cranky and no one makes it. They just make excuses for you. He's old. What are you going to do when you're that age? Forget him. I'm not worried about my wife leaving me or my faithfulness. I'm very happy in my relationships. I'm not worried too much about money. I'm not rich, but I'm not poor. I'm worried about the state of the nation and the state of the world, and how few people are prepared for what's coming, and how can I write my books faster and sell more so that maybe they'll understand why going in.
Thank you.
I'm a worried word, but I haven't been
Guy,
able to
if you
sleep
could
well since I
create,
was a child. My sleeping habits
yeah,
started when because it was always midnight or after, when you're asleep and when it's quiet. That's when everything bad would happen. That's when there would be horrendous fights, and that would be their screaming. That's where gunshots would go off. That's where I'd be pulled out of the bed in the middle of the night and thrown in the back of the car. We're going to move right now. I'd wake up sometimes and I didn't even know where I was. Oh, we're in Mexico. We're not even in the States anymore. And so there's a part of my subconscious that has a hard time resting in sleep, because there's a part of my subconscious that says that's when the crisis will happen, is when I'm deepest. And so I to this day, I have a hard time sleeping, which is a blessing. I tell everybody it's a blessing. I work really, really long hours, and I don't mind, because I'd rather be doing that than be trying to sleep when I can't sleep. So if I'm going to be awake, I'm going to get something done, be productive. Those are my best hours. When everybody else is asleep, that's when I rock. So I've turned it to my advantage. I try not to allow my past to define my future. I take what's a weakness and I turn it into a strength. I can't sleep. Well, I might as well be productive. Let me find what I really love to do and do that when I can't sleep. If I need a nap during the middle of the day, I'm old now, I'm retired. I can take naps. I like naps. I've learned to really love my little nap time, because if I can't sleep at night, I might as well get a little nap in the afternoon. So you have to have a sense of humor. You have to kind of approach life saying it's always going to be a struggle. There's always going to be an obstacle in front of you. There's always going to be a river to cross and a mountain to climb. Be of good cheer, because that's what makes life interesting, and what's making you strong. And in the scriptures about prophecy, it says when you see these things happening, look up, because your redemption is close. The good things.
wow, what an inspiration. Guy, if you could create a quote right now for you to leave to the audience listening and the world as your legacy, what would it be?
Create a what?
Create a quote.
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 Sure, you're gonna put me on the spot, aren't you? I have some amazing quotes in my book that I've written. If I had to spout them from memory, I don't know that I could. I can tell you a quote that inspires me from somebody else, but you didn't ask me to do that. You asked me to create one. Life is short. Live a good one. Life is very short. It ends when we don't want it to, when we least expect it. And it doesn't matter if short means 2 years or 50 years. That's really short compared to what we want to be. I constantly think about all the things I would want to do, the things I would want to learn, the things I would want to accomplish if I could just keep living in a healthy way. I would learn art. I'd learn to play piano better. I'd go traveling. I would build homes for the homeless. Life is short, so it means we're always trying to make really tight choices for the time we have. Make each one of those choices count. As a result, I watch very little television, because life is short, and I can sit here just being numbed out, or I can actually make something happen. I can make something of myself. I could create something. I could learn something. I could do something for somebody else. Life is short. Make it count. How about that? That's just, again, I have way better quotes in my book, but that's just an ad hoc about.
But
Now, my favorite quote that I carry with me
it's short and
comes from
simple.
War and
And
Peace
that's
by
enough.
Tolstoy. Tolstoy wrote, and I think this is very pertinent to the world right now, that nobody was prepared for the war that everybody expected. So if I take the word war out and I put in whatever crisis, nobody was prepared for the climate change everybody expected. Nobody was prepared for the heartache everybody expected. Nobody was prepared for the tough times everybody expected. Nobody was prepared for those things that we know are coming, but we just don't want to. We don't want to think about that right now. Trying to say, right? And we all do that. We all. So that's become for me one of my favorite books. But I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Guy. Thank you so much for your story.
Thank you.
And there you have it, guys. You heard it from the person himself, Guy Morris. Before we close off, Guy, I'd like to thank you personally for the work that you are doing for the world and for advancing every step of the way despite the challenges, creating trails for those that will come after you. For our listeners, this has been that one podcast with that controversial name, You're Worthless. Read that again. The juxtaposition of your very soul. Now, if you find yourself thinking that you are worthless, you're probably not alone. But more importantly, ask yourself a level deeper. If I'm worthless, then why the heck am I here? It is because your soul have chosen to be here energetically, all the way from the ethers, and for that reason itself, you are worthy and you are enough. This has been Guy Morris, your guest of the day, and Nick Nieras, your host, signing off. Thank you, Guy, so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Nick.